My name is Jack Thorne. For over 3 years, I've been running from the SCP Foundation. This is my story. I had just broken my way out of an enormous warehouse and now found myself out in the darkness with my new friend Andre. We had been kept there by an unusual hooded figure and we were lucky to escape with our lives. "This way," Andre said, guiding me through the darkness around obstacles that were difficult to make out. "I'm not really sure what I'm seeing," Andre whispered, his eyes glowing a light purple color. It was clear that he had better vision than the average person, but even he was confused by our surroundings. "Wait," he whispered sharply, pushing his hand against my chest. We both ducked down, behind what felt like a shelf. From behind the shelf, we could hear footsteps. Someone was taking enormous strides. It sounded like someone who must be really tall. "We're not supposed to be out of the woods yet," Andre whispered. Once the sound of footsteps had entirely disappeared, we continued creeping. We walked for hours, never leaving the maze of shelves and cabinets we were surrounded by. As light finally started to creep back in, we made a shocking discovery. The light that finally illuminated our surroundings wasn't sunlight. It was fluorescent lighting, like that used in a department store. We looked around in horror to see that we had escaped a warehouse that had somehow been built inside what appeared to be the world's most enormous furniture store. Aisles of beds, cupboards, closets, and cutlery were arranged as far as the eye could see. We had been walking all night through a never-ending labyrinth of middle-class merchandise, and it didn't look like there was any escape. Suddenly, a creature emerged from behind one of the merchandise display cases. It looked like an extremely tall man, except this man had no hair and no face. Its arms hung so long that they nearly touched the ground, whereas his legs didn't quite seem long enough for his frame. The man was wearing a blue and yellow uniform. The name Ikea branded onto the t-shirt. "Ikea?" Andre whispered in amazement. The creature seemed to notice us, but it ignored us, content to wander mindlessly on a set route. "Let's get the hell out of here," Andre said. We ran up the aisle, turning and running for what felt like an hour until we noticed a tall structure in the distance. "Look," I yelled, pointing at what seemed like a circus tent poking out from above the cabinets, almost reaching as high as the ceiling. We continued our journey until we finally arrived at a long fence made out of crudely sharpened metal poles that had been forced into holes dug through the linoleum flooring. "Who would have done this?" I said in amazement. Well, from which faction do you herald?" A voice called out from beyond the fence. A person then emerged moments later, holding a sharpened pole menacingly. "No faction," I replied. "Just two guys trying to figure out the fastest way to get the hell out of here." The older man studied my face closely, his eyebrows lowering when he realized that we were telling the truth. "You're a couple of newbies," he said with a sigh, dislodging one of the poles from the ground, allowing us to enter. "You're welcome to stay with us if you're friendly and willing to help in the fight." The older man introduced himself as Isaac and explained that he was one of the many living together in this corner of the Ikea, all of whom have been lost within the store. "I'm one of the elders, which means I've been here for over 30 years, Isaac said proudly. Andre and I were shocked to hear that. Isaac led us through his township. It was an entire community made out of bedding. There were little shops made out of repurposed desks and homes that had been pulled together using furniture found throughout the store. The township culminated with a town hall, made out of hundreds of individual cabinets and desks, draped in countless blankets which had given it the appearance of a circus tent from a distance. "Welcome to our community!" An older woman emerged from the town hall, her arms open wide. She was wearing a cloak made from blankets that had been stitched together and a crown made of knives. "I am the All-Mother, and I watch over everyone in bright light." "Is that where we are right now?" I asked as I took a seat at a large round table in the middle of the town hall. "Indeed. We're a community of 85, and we look after our own." The All-Mother gave a hand signal to a girl who was waiting at the far side of the makeshift room. The girl quickly ran out and returned with a hot pot of tea. After brief pleasantries, we got down to business. "All-Mother, we need to get the hell out of here." She stirred her tea while looking at us suspiciously. "After all these years, the majority of us have grown old and tired. Like myself and Isaac out there, who still loyally guards our borders. But if a member of staff actually broke in, there's nothing we could do." "Staff?" I asked. "There are employees trapped in here?" "They look like staff, but they aren't human. They're monsters that are docile during the day, but terrifying at night. Every night we stay here is a fight for survival." Andre and I looked at each other knowingly. The faceless creature wearing an Ikea uniform was still burned into our minds.
If we're to survive, we need every able-bodied man at the border fence fighting every night. If we don't keep up the fight, we're doomed to die.
Andre and I finished our tea and were then taken to the armory, where we were able to choose from several sharpened poles and other pieces of metal. After that, we took a walk around the township, marveling at how so many people traded, worked, and lived their lives harmoniously within the confines of this strange community. Suddenly, we were pulled from the path by the girl that poured our tea earlier.
"Come with me quickly," she whispered.
We followed her, ducking around shelves and piles of pillows until we reached a hideout that had been hidden beneath a covering of blankets. Inside was a group of 5 teenagers, each joking and laughing until we came in.
"I'm Gabby, and we're all getting the hell out of here tonight."
Gabby explained that, for over a year, the teenagers had carefully and tirelessly worked to discover the route of the store. If you took even one wrong turn, you would walk in this circle, doomed to wander forever throughout the store. But if you took the exact right path, there was an exit that could be reached.
"But," she continued, "the exit is heavily guarded by staff."
"Why don't we just take the route during the day?" I asked, but everyone shook their heads solemnly.
"The route seems only to work at night. No idea why."
By the time we'd finished formulating the plan, the lights in the store had all turned out, the darkness signaling that it was go time. We raced out of the hideout and ran to the border fence, which had now been entirely surrounded by staff. While staff had been calm and docile during the day, they were now yelling ferociously, commanding us to get out of the store because the store had closed. Some were inadvertently killing themselves, pushed by others surging forward and impaling themselves on the sharpened poles that had been erected. Most of the town's residents were standing by the sharpened poles, swiping homemade weapons at the creatures, defending themselves in their homes. "Why don't we bring everyone with us?" I asked Gabby. Gabby hung her head.
"The older generation has come to love this place too much. I've begged them, but they'd rather die here than take the risk of leaving."
From a distance, the All-Mother came over, scowling.
"Join the fight!"
she screeched, shoving poles into her hands and pushing us toward the oncoming staff. We swiped at the staff, each of them savagely pounding their hands into the defense structures, causing their hands to shred, covering the defense bowls and flaps of skin. "They don't bleed," I called out to Andre as I shoved my pole into the nearest staff member. We fought with all our might, waiting for the right moment. Eventually, Gabby called out,
"Now!"
With all our strength, Andre and I pushed forward, knocking the remaining staff members onto the ground. We then stabbed them until they stopped moving, then bolted into the night, the All-Mother screaming in despair as we left her and her township behind. Luminescent paint guided our way. It had been painted onto cabinets and signs throughout the store, leading us in the right direction. We ran as fast as we could, dodging staff members that would run after us, screaming at us, commanding us to leave. Eventually, the exit came into sight. It was a large glass double door, and in front of it were 2 huge staff members. I ran, screaming, and jumped as high as I could, latching myself onto the creature's head and pulling it onto the ground. Andre tackled the other one, forcing it to the ground. With both staff members subdued, I called out to the teenagers, "Go! Don't worry about us!" Gabby and the others tore open the door and ran out into the night. Several staff members ran out after them, but they were peppered with bullets shot by armed men that were now helping the teenagers from outside. "It looks like the SCP Foundation is outside," I called out. Andre's face turned white. "I'm not going back there," he said, breaking the neck of the staff member he'd been wrestling. I tore the soft head off the creature I'd been wrestling and stood up to talk to Andre. "You don't have to. I can slink us into the shadows. They'll never see us." Andre looked unconvinced and nervous. Suddenly, the largest staff member I'd ever seen roared as it ran towards us. "I'll distract it. You leave and have a good life," Andre said quietly, putting a hand on my shoulder. He then waved his arms and yelled, before turning and running off the designated path. "No!" I screamed out, but in an instant, as soon as he was off the path, he vanished, taking the creature with him. I stood for a moment in shock, devastated to lose a friend, but also aware that if I didn't get out now, I might lose my chance. With that, I melted into the shadow cast by the door, quietly slipping through the shadows and outside, past the SCP guard standing ready. I was finally free.
Won't stop till I hear him say,